You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, thanks for tuning back into the show. This is, and I am, Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I'm writing and recording this on Wednesday morning, the day after the election that still doesn't appear to be settled. So I think it's a good time to say that whoever wins this razor-thin race needs to find a way to bring together our sorely divided nation. It's still in the balance, so I'm prepared to say that should my guy or the other guy win, then I will accept the result and try to be kinder to people who simply don't see things the way that I do. Yeah, that's the politics sorted out, and we can get on with the show. This week, Dan Schoenthal is going to inspire you all with his AT hike. I'm not giving too much away, but he really is a marvel. Dan will be on shortly. Marian Alowski, Director of Science and Stewardship of the ATC, got the subject Scenic and Scientific Natural Resource Management on the AT. I thought it might be quite a narrow topic. As you'll hear, I was completely wrong. Marian sent me some useful pointers that had me scrambling to ask some semi-intelligent questions, and I think we'll learn a lot about this important topic. Marian will be on after Dan. Bill Tickner, or the particularly appropriately named Mr. President, on this day after the election day, is within 100 miles of his goal. And he hasn't got the 100-mile wilderness to negotiate. He's hiking through the wonderful ridges of Virginia and absorbing every last moment as he pushes forward to Damascus, his final stop. Finally, Keith Foskett reaches Katahdin in the second from last chapter of Balancing on Blue. While I mentioned Fozzie's book, don't forget that you can now buy the professionally recorded version on Amazon, iTunes and Audible. So let's get started. Here's Dan Schoenthal, or Tremor. So let's meet today's guest. This is Dan Schoenthal. Hi Dan, how are you?
Good, Steve. How are you today?
I'm pretty good, thank you. Now, as we all know, lots of hikers completed the Appalachian Trail in 2020, ignoring or skirting various rules and edicts. You decided to postpone your hike, Dan. You were originally planning to go on an April start, but you followed the guidance and eventually got on the trail in August. What was your plan at that stage when you got on the trail in August?
Well, I was going to start April 9th and do a thru-hike, like you just mentioned. And
sure.
As people started to work their way and get to know how to deal with the COVID, I thought maybe I could do a partial hike in August and, do a couple 100 miles and see where I was at physically and mentally and see if I'd be able to, because I postponed my hike until 2021, but I wanted to get a feel for the trail and see where I was at physically and mentally. So I went in August and did 300 miles.
Cool. And you did the approach trail, and as you say, the first 300 miles, but you got off in September. But for you in particular, that was still a remarkable achievement. What is it about you, Dan, that people need to know?
I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in August of 2015.
Right.
And that kind of pushed do the Appalachian Trail hike to a new level.
Right. Well, I'm looking at you now. You look pretty well to me anyway. So I know the audience can't see you, but I can see you right now. So let's go back a few years. You've been a runner for most of your life. That's right, isn't it? You were a runner?
Yeah, I was in the Air Force Reserves, and you had to do a fitness test every year. So when I was younger, I'd be that guy that waited till like 2 or 3 weeks before the fitness test to get ready. But as I got older, that wasn't working anymore. So I started running on a full-time basis. I was doing 5Ks, 10Ks, and half marathons. And I had planned on doing one full marathon. It was going to be the Marine Corps Marathon in Washington, D.C. I picked that one because of the history of the city and all the views. And when I was training for that full marathon is when I started noticing the Parkinson's disease symptoms come out.
And did you know straight away there was something going on? Or, I mean, how did that happen to you? You know, I know that, you know, when any of us get little aches and pains, we think, oh, there's nothing, I'll get over that. Did you blow them off at first, or did you think this could be serious straight away?
At first, you know, I ran the Buffalo half marathon in May, and I started training for the Marine Corps marathon, which is in October, and right around end of July or August. And I came home from a 3 or 4 mile run, and I told my wife, I go, something isn't right. I just ran a half marathon, and now I'm struggling with 3 and 4 miles.
Wow. And what was it you were feeling then? What was actually happening to you? Or did you feel that was happening to you anyway?
My left leg, after about 2 miles, at that time, after about 2 miles, it started seemed to be heavier and start dragging.
Right.
And now if I run a quarter mile, it does it. But
wow.
And but it would be intermittent. It would happen on one run, and then the next run it wouldn't.
Right.
So
you were in your early 50s when this happened. I think you're mid 50s now.
I'm 56 now. This was when I was about 47. Was when I was going to run that half marathon.
Right.
And in 2013, my doctor sent me to the neurologist, and they diagnosed me with essential tremor, because the full-blown tremor for Parkinson hadn't showed itself yet.
Right. Well, as you mentioned the word, please, I mean, we need to explain we don't actually need to explain your trail name so much as say, why did you decide to give yourself a trail name like Tremor? That sounds such a British thing to do, by the way. That's the sort of thing we would do ourselves.
Well, when I decided to go, I was on a training hike up by me in western New York. We have the Finger Lakes Trail, and I was just doing a training, and I thought maybe that I could hook up with, the Parkinson's Foundation and do a fundraiser.
Sure.
And I go, if I do that, I'm going to need a trail name. And I thought the most notable sign of Parkinson's is the tremor. That's what people notice. When they look at Michael J. Fox, they see him shaking.
Sure.
So I was supposed to go with a guy from Tennessee, Kevin Dunlop, and he had already taken the name Shaker.
Oh God!
But
that's hilarious. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. But you did it to make people laugh, I guess, because if you introduce yourself as Tremor, they're going to want to know why, and you must have told them why. I'm sure there's this kind of nervous laughter reaction to it, isn't there?
Well, I usually started out with what they ask what your trail name is, and I say Tremor, and they go, "Why that?" And I go, "Well, it's not because I pound the ground and stomp. It's because I have Parkinson's disease," and then they get the look, the surprise, and feel sorry for you look, and I just say, no, it is what it is. It doesn't define who I am. It's just something I have.
Yeah, but and I'm asking about it quite a bit only because to set the scene for your hike, really, which is quite just amazing that you're doing this. How did you, for a relatively young man in your early 50s, how did you take that diagnosis? Did you get depressed? Did you start drinking? I mean, what happened?
Well, actually, I quit drinking about 15 years ago.
All right. You start again then.
but the thought did cross my mind to start drinking again. But no.
Oh my God. No.
But you go through, first you go through denial because Parkinson's, there's no blood test or any kind of test that diagnoses. It's completely up to the neurologist or movement disorder specialist.
Right.
So I immediately said, no, there's no way I have Parkinson's. He's got to be wrong. So that was the denial phase, and then
sure.
And then you go through the anger phase, where you're just mad at the world because you have a something that you can't get rid of.
Sure.
And then you get depressed, and you go through the whole gauntlet of emotions, and then eventually you say, you know what, if I got it, I'm going to deal with it.
Good for you. So hiking became your new pastime instead of running. Did that help with your disease, or did that help you cope with that, the anger side of things?
Actually, both. It helps with the disease because besides the medication, they tell you that exercise is the key to slowing down Parkinson's. And then mentally, I was out in the woods which I'm a hunter and fisherman, and it was kind of a natural progression, and it kept me calm mentally and kept me stable.
Wow. So did anybody, did you see that the disease, or did your doctor see that the disease was sort of stabilizing a little bit? Or I think you said to me before, this is just generally degenerative. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a neurological degenerative progressive disease that will never go away.
Right.
And you just have, if you exercise, you're not going to stop it. There's no way to stop it,
sure.
but you can slow it down. And if you just make the best of it.
Okay. So I know that the AT had kind of been on your radar for a little while. When did you start thinking about it? And then when did you decide that this was something that you really wanted to do?
I've been thinking about it probably since I was in my early 20s. But, it comes in your mind, and then you go to work and it's gone.
Yes.
And then it comes in and it goes. And you hear somebody talking about it at work, and you go, hey, yeah, I got to get going on that.
Yeah.
But then when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, probably 6 months later, I was on YouTube, and a Appalachian Trail video came on. I can't remember which one, but and that put the bug right in my ear, or right in my head. So from then on, I went out in the living room, and I told my wife, I said, hey, I want to do the Appalachian Trail. She goes, you haven't mentioned that in a few years. What brings that up? And I told her that. And she goes, well, you're not dead. You might as well start planning it.
That is so cool. What a great reaction. And that was her first reaction. Not you're a crazy old sod.
Well,
didn't think that.
I'm sure there was a little of that in there too. It was a few years ago. I may be remembering it not perfect, but she's pretty solid behind me. She's all for it. She picks up a lot of the slack when I was gone for that 300 miles, and
sure.
when I pick up from that point and do the rest of it, she's going to pick up a lot more slack. Isn't
that interesting? That's something we haven't talked about much on the show, how, not only do you get support from home, but they pick up a lot of the slack that you just don't do. I met somebody on the trail who was a farmer, and his wife was running the farm and doing whatever she was doing before. And apparently he said all the local farmers were pitching in to help her run his farm. People are amazing how they allow their spouse, or they just let their spouse get on with things, and their spouse seems to willingly accept it. And your wife did exactly that, did she?
Oh yes, she was all on board, and it wasn't just her. My son and my daughter and my sisters, they all helped out. And my brother-in-law, he come over and cut the grass, and
cool.
Just kind of take the load off my wife.
That's awesome. And I presume you are guided by a doctor. How did he respond when you told him? Or did he think actually, if you say exercise is good for you, did he think it was a good idea?
I talked to him last year about it, and he kind of looked at me a little like I was crazy. But he goes, the exercise would help. And I talked to the Parkinson's Foundation, and they put out a newsletter, and I got a call from a girl that works at Damon College in Buffalo. Uh-huh. She's a physical therapist doctor, and she wanted to do she did a pre-hike physical on me, and she wants to do a post-hike physical when I get back. But then the COVID hit, so the hike didn't happen. So we're going to do that in the spring. She's going to do the same thing. Then she's going to write a paper on the effects of long endurance sports with Parkinson's disease.
Wow. I mean, you see, and we're going to come into a minute how it's affected you, but let's just step back a little sec. Now, you started hiking, but now you were moving it up to a whole new level, obviously. What gear changes did you have to make, and how did you research that? Were you just looking for other people's ideas, or being an outdoor guy, you kind of knew what sort of stuff you needed?
Well, I had an inkling what I needed, but I had really no clue what it took for a long, when you go down for a day hike, you put on a pack, you carry some water, maybe some snacks, and maybe a water purifier in case you run out. But
sure.
For a long distance hike, I knew I needed a backpack, a tent, and a sleeping bag, and that's about all I knew. I didn't know what kind of food I should carry. You're not going to eat steak and potatoes or lobster and whatever goes with lobster, but
Yeah.
I had no idea what to eat on the trail and what other accessories I would need. If I would just gone with my own thing, my pack would have weighed about 80 pounds.
So what did it weigh when you started then?
With my pack and the basics and my medication, I think I was at 38 pounds.
Wow, that's not too bad, really, considering you had to take quite a bit of medication, didn't you? So how did you actually manage that? Because I know logistically some people who are diabetics have problems with taking stuff on the trail. How did you manage your medication?
Well, at the pharmacy, they got little pill bags. They're little like sandwich bags, but lots smaller. I put them in there. Then I got a Ziploc container, and I put them in there, and then I put them in a bag and then a dry sack, because that was probably the most important thing I had.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure it stayed dry.
And it worked out fine, no problems at all. And what did you do about food then? Did you resupply from home, or did you go into town? Because every extra bit you do involves more work for you to do, doesn't it? So how did you work out the logistics of it?
I did what probably most hikers do. I took a 5-day supply to start with, and then every 4 or 5 days I'd take a shuttle into town and put the mask on, go in the store just like I would here, and then get my resupply goods. And
yeah. So how do they react to you in town? Because as you went in August through September, things were easing off quite a bit, weren't they? Where were you in August after 300 miles? I'm trying to think where you were.
I was at just past Allen's Gap, probably 25 miles just north of Hot Springs, if I had to guess.
Right, nice. So what were they like to you? What were the various townspeople like to you? Because I know Hot Springs had a bit of a tough rap this year from its reaction to people earlier on, but you went a bit later on. Had things calmed down a bit? Yeah,
I had no negative comments, or the outfitters were open and the stores were open, and I didn't advertise I was a hiker. I just went in there as a regular customer.
Yeah. So already said you set out in August, but you intended to set out in April. Once you you thought about it because of the COVID situation and what the ATC was saying, I presume. Did you think it was over for you, or did you think you would still go?
I was kind of on the fence. I was hoping my Parkinson's didn't progress to the point where I couldn't do it anymore.
Right.
But I had the confidence that I'd be in a good shape come 2021, because I hike all year long.
Right.
And
so this is a bonus for you then. The 300 miles is a bonus, really. So
right.
you've only got 1,900 miles to go.
Right.
So,
and plus, it gave me a good sense of where I was with my gear.
Right.
And I'm pretty set with that. I may do a tent change or maybe a sleeping bag change to get a lighter something here or there, but I was pretty comfortable with what I had.
Cool. So you set out in August. What were those? And I think you did the approach trail as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Actually, I did the hike-in trail because I wanted to see what the hike-in was all about.
All right.
That was pretty much closed. But so you did 6.5 miles on the hike-in, but you still had to do the last 3.5 on the approach trail. Right. So actually, I added an extra mile. So you
got started in August and you started making progress, and you probably soon learned that the AT is pretty. I think it's pretty tough in Georgia, to be honest with you. How did you cope with those early miles? Were you okay with it?
Actually, I thought a couple times about giving up because it's nothing like around here. We have Allegheny State Park right down the road from us. You go up the hill, you go across, and you come back down, and that's what I kind of thought would be in Georgia. And then I got down there, and it was up, and then some more up. And then just before you get to the top, you got to go up some more.
Yeah, a little bit more up again. And what about the downs? I mean, some of the older people, self included, I sometimes find the downs tougher, don't you?
Yeah, it's a lot tougher on your knees and your legs, I think, with the downs.
So tell me, what sort of issues do you need to cope with when you're hiking? that somebody like me is lucky enough not to have to worry about? What are the issues that really affect you that I'm just not even thinking about?
Like in the morning, I wake up and like all my muscles are stiff and rigid. Right. And I have to wait till my medication kicks in before I can really get going.
All right. Does that delay your start then quite considerably?
Yeah, I'd like, if I was totally healthy, I'd probably start hiking at 7:30 in the morning, but I usually didn't get out of the what you call camp or the shelter till 8:30, 8:45.
Right.
And then I have numbness in my toes, and about every 2 miles I'd have to stop and take off my shoes, and because my toes would start burning.
Wow.
So I'd take my shoes off for about 5 minutes, put them back on. I was good for another 2 miles.
Jeez. Well, I had numbness in my toes, but that was because I kept stubbing them against flipping rocks. I'm looking at you and I'm thinking about you, knowing what it's like to do this and the various things you had to do. And because of the tremor, do you have balance issues more than I would have? I mean, I fall over all the time anyway, so I'm not a great one to talk about this. So, what are does balance get affected by your condition, or does the mere fact that you have the tremor that's affecting your balance?
Oh, the balance is one of the symptoms of Parkinson's, and that's one of the reasons I had to quit working. I was a union pipe fitter. Most of our work was at 30 feet in the air, and people didn't like it when you dropped tools on their heads. And and plus, being up in the air was a big concern when you're on top of a ladder with balance issues.
Sure.
But hiking the trail, my trekking poles probably kept me from having serious falls probably half a dozen times a day.
Wow.
You dig in and you lose your balance, and I could catch them with the trekking pole. So it was like having two more legs.
Yeah. They are. How anybody goes without trekking poles, I have no idea. They saved me so many times. They really did. Yeah. And did you find yourself, though, despite all this, despite the various things you were trying to overcome, and that, did you find yourself getting into what I call your rhythm, the rhythm of the hike, or did you have the same thing every day where you were struggling all the time, or did you really get into it?
When I first started, you're going uphill. You got, just because of your conditioning, I would have to stop half a dozen times. But by the time I got to the 300-mile mark, I was moving right up the hill. If it was a serious up, I might have to stop once, get a drink of water. But yeah, I definitely got in a rhythm, and I was starting to feel the hiker legs.
Yes.
What they call the hiker legs. I wasn't sure what that was until I got to around 200 miles. And I didn't have serious hiker legs like you would have after 500 miles, but I was starting to get them. And
when we spoke, you talked about the sense of accomplishment that you had by getting to the top of it. Well, tell us more about that, because I had the same feeling, to be honest with you.
Well, I noticed I would start at the bottom, and I'd get about halfway up, and I would be like, man, I just don't know if I could make it anymore. But you don't want to turn around and go backwards.
No.
Your body's saying, I don't want to go forward, but you can't stay where you're at. So, and people coming down the hill, they'd be like, oh, you're almost there.
Which is the biggest lie on the trail, isn't it? You're almost at the top. Oh, my God.
And then you go another 300 yards ago. They just said I was almost there. I can't even see the top yet. But once you get to the top and there's a view of, say, Georgia or North Carolina or wherever you may be, that's when you get the feeling of it that this was worth it.
You feel like you've earned it, don't you?
Yeah, you absolutely do.
Yeah, it's a great feeling. But those false summits, particularly I found in the early miles, you think you're near the top. I remember going up Blood Mountain thinking I was there. Oh my gosh, I thought I was there for hours before I actually got there. Oh, yeah. I thought it was just round the corner, and it certainly wasn't. And I just think back to that all the time. And you got yourself a hiking buddy, didn't you? Tell us about Vanilla Bill.
Well, I met Bill probably the third day I was in. He was hiking with a couple other guys that were basically slowing him down, but they were good people. They had a different mission on the trail. But I met Bill, and I go, hey, Bill, what's your trail name? He goes, well, I'm too vanilla to have a trail name. I really don't do anything. I go, so you're Vanilla Bill then? And Vanilla Bill and I hiked together till we hit the 300-mile mark, and like the false summit, I go, "Hey, Bill, we're almost there." And he goes, we get to the top, I go, "Bill, we're going to have to write a book called This Ain't in the Brochure."
Because it certainly isn't, is it? I met a couple of people, German people on the trail in 2014, and they said they show a film in Germany about every 3 or 4 months, and it shows this beautifully prepared hiking trail called the Appalachian Trail. We all come across it. He said they are completely falsely advertised. So because it is so much tougher than any of them ever imagined.
Me and Bill got to Jacob's Ladder, and we're about halfway up, and I turned around to him. I go, "Bill, this definitely is not in the brochure."
Oh, dear. So you have the physical challenge. Anyway, we all have that anyway, but you have a bigger physical challenge that you were facing. There is still a mental challenge, but also the opportunity to think. Did you enjoy that part of it?
Most of the time. It's kind of like running a half marathon. You start out in the beginning of the day, and you're all excited. Hey, we're going to see some new stuff. And then about halfway through the day, you're like, "Man, what the heck am I doing out here?" And then you hit a view, or you get to the next shelter and you reach your goal, and you get that, "Hey, I made it again."
That's right. You made it again.
That little bit of euphoria that, hey, I hit my goal and I seen some awesome stuff today.
Yeah. So what, you were enjoying it? You got to Beyond Hot Springs. What prompted the decision to finish late September, or was that always the time you were thinking of finishing?
I started in August with the plan to go to maybe October, late September, early October. So that was kind of in the plan right from the beginning.
Okay. So you're back home now. And on reflection, do you think you bit off more than you could chew, or did those 6 weeks of hiking really reaffirm to you that you can do it?
It absolutely did. At first, when I started in Georgia at Amicalola Falls and Springer Mountain, I was really doubting myself and whether this was something I could actually accomplish. But by the time I got to that 300-mile mark, I go, I can do the rest of this. Whether I can or not, that remains to be seen. But mentally, I'm more confident than I was when I left to go to Georgia to begin with.
Now, I know you said you've got this woman who wants to do some sort of pre and post test and see how you are. But you know your body better because you notice it in the first place. How did you think your illness responded to the hike?
Most of it, I believe, was positive. That my feet getting numb and starting to burn, that was probably the only negative that I can pick out of it. But it was something I could manage and deal with if as long as I knew, if I didn't, if I did 2 miles and my feet started burning and we were almost there and I kept going, that was a mistake. Once Sure. They started burning, I had to stop and take care of it, or it would be an issue later on in the day.
And what sort of days were you able to do? Did you do any longish mile days, or was 8 miles, 6, 7 miles a good day? I mean, what sort of days were you doing?
We did mostly between 10 and 12.
Solid.
At the beginning it was 10, but we did have a couple of 15 and 16 mile days.
And actually, while we mentioned the illness, I understand that you've been trying to raise money for Parkinson's while on the hike. Do you have a link that people can go to if they'd like to donate? Because sometimes people do. They
can go to my Facebook page, Dan Schoenthal, and there's a link to the Moving Day, Parkinson's Cool. Moving Day event.
Cool. Well, I'll put that in, obviously, into the show notes.
They can go right to the Parkinson's Foundation and go to the Moving Day and go to Team Tremor, and they should be able to reach it from there.
That's cool. So what's the plan going forward now? You're feeling like you can do it. Have you got a date already in mind for next year, or are you just going to wait and see how things go?
Well, tentatively, I'm going to start in early April. Same as I was last year, except I'll be 300 miles to the plus. After Christmas and the holidays, I'll start training again. Right now, I'm in the middle of hunting season, and getting the house ready for winter. It's a little different up here in Western New York than it is down there in Florida.
It certainly is. I mean, shorts, t-shirts, and flip-flops all the time, and I don't do anything around the house. So
today it's 52 degrees out and the wind's blowing, so nice. little different.
Yeah. So what's the plan then? Because if you said you're going to go in April, and I started February, March, is the cold weather the factor for wanting to start in April?
Absolutely. I get way stiffer in the wintertime.
Right.
So instead of getting out of camp at 8:30, I probably wouldn't get out till 10.
Wow.
Just due to the stiffer muscles, and plus I live in Western New York where I see a lot of snow, and once I leave to go hike the trail, I don't want to see any snow.
Oh, sure. Well, I think your 300 miles is a remarkable achievement in its own right. But the fact that you're heading out again is so inspirational for those of us who are unable or feel they're unable to get out there and try. So thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. And please, when you do go again, just reach out to me, let me know you're going. I'd love to keep people up to date.
I will. And if anybody with Parkinson's disease is listening to your show, you don't have to hike the Appalachian Trail to feel better. Just taking a few steps more than what you took yesterday and keep doing that, I'm sure it'll help.
That's great. Well, thanks for coming on, Dan. So you're an inspiration. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Steve. And just an average guy doing what I want to do.
Cool. Take it easy. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
I must say, when I look back at the people I've interviewed over the years, I'm struck by the determination of everybody who takes on this journey. But in Dan's case, it must be doubly, triply, or quadruply hard to take this on. I can hardly stand up without any noticeable diseases. That Dan is prepared to push his body with such a disease speaks highly of his character and determination in a way that I thought was especially inspiring. He's actually since told me that the fund he was raising for has now expired, but if you know somebody afflicted by this shocking condition and you want to contribute, I've added a link in the show notes that should enable you to do so. So now it's our weekly segment with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. So let's welcome Marian Orlowski. Right. This week's guest is from the ATC is Marian Orlowski. I've got it wrong already. Orlowski, Director
Perfect.
of Science and Stewardship. Hi, Marian. How are you?
Hi, I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Well, when we connected, so that I can find out what you do, you sent me so much more background that, frankly, kind of surprised me by the scope of your work. So with your permission, I'd like to touch briefly on each of the areas you indicated so that listeners get a kind of good overview of science and stewardship as it pertains particularly to the Appalachian Trail. Does that make sense?
That sounds great.
Okay. Right. First up is natural resource and habitat management. And you mentioned that you conduct quite a bit of habitat restoration work to protect the trail's biodiversity and promote ecologically functional and climate resilient lands. How on earth do you promote ecologically functional and climate resilient lands?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll try to answer it briefly. Habitats and ecosystems generally that are well maintained with high biodiversity and just overall health and function are what we're striving for. And to do that, we basically are doing a lot of resource management, and that may include things like altering or protecting a habitat for rare species to thrive, and that will help contribute to maintaining biodiversity. And a lot of times that has a large component of invasive species management. So removing
that is another section, and I'm going to come to that in a minute,
Okay.
though. But is how do you actually do that over a 2,200 mile stretch? I mean, that's the most significant thing to me. It's such a
Right.
huge area, isn't it?
It is. So we spend a lot of time prioritizing and determining what are the best areas for us to focus in. And so there's certain areas that really stand out because they are well buffered from impacts of climate change already, or they already maintain high biodiversity. And our goal really is to protect those areas and keep them in good condition. And then we'll focus on other areas that may not be in the best condition currently, but with a little bit of work could be. And
so you don't look at the full well, you probably do look at the full 2,200 miles, but there's only a certain number of miles you can really look at realistically, isn't there?
Sure. Yeah, we can't do it all.
Absolutely. So you mentioned rare species, so let's talk about that. When any of us climbed Katahdin, we're made very aware of the need to keep on the path and protect the particular plants there. And I always remember seeing it first time and last time I went last year. Mm-hmm. But I must say, I don't recall similar signs anywhere else on the trail. I may have just missed them. Can you give us some idea of the type of plants and the work involved to protect other areas?
Sure. Yeah. So the Appalachian Trail boasts, or its claim is that we have more rare, threatened, endangered plant species than any other unit of the National Park Service. And true to form, on the Appalachian Trail, we don't have a lot of on-site interpretation and signage, and that's intentional. So you're often walking through areas with really unique species and habitats and systems, communities of species, and you may not be aware. So we work in a lot of different areas to protect those particular plant communities, and it varies. The Gray's lily is one of the more talked about and showy species that you'll find in the southern Appalachians, and we have some federally endangered species and some that are highly coveted by collectors, and so we often have to talk about these pretty carefully, and we don't share exact locations for that reason because they're so vulnerable and threatened.
So you're basically trusting that people will miss them. Is that basically what you're saying?
Well, it would be a really large task to actually try to make people well aware of them.
Sure.
But yeah, in general, if you're staying on the trail, you're not likely to encounter them. But that's why it's so important, like you mentioned with Katahdin, to stay on the trail. But yeah, it's not unlikely if you were to leave the trail that you would encounter, if you knew what you were looking for, where you were looking, a rare species.
Well, and I know that, and I can't recall what the species is. I should have looked it up before I called you. But I know on Katahdin that apparently something exists up there that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Is that correct?
I wouldn't doubt it. Yes, there are a number of alpine species in particular that exist in very few places in the world. The White Mountains also has a variety of alpine species that occur only in that location. So I'll have to look. I should know which that might be, but I don't.
Now, talking of species, and this is another one, invasive species, and that's pretty self-explanatory, I guess. But looking at my own back garden, I mean, the weeds that are so invasive and going into plants, that must be a massive, almost a war against plants, isn't it? But how successful is the ATC in this work, and are there any critical battles in this area that we're actually losing?
Yes, so it's really important work. I would say we're successful to varying degrees because it is such a huge issue. Invasive species are second only to climate change as an ecological stressor to the Appalachian Trail. And it really is a policy issue, to be honest. What's here is here, and it's really unlikely that we're going to get rid of most invasive species.
Sure.
So preventing future invasions is a really high priority. But for the species that are already on the trail and in the corridor, we have to go through a prioritization effort where we focus mostly on habitats that have very few invasives, and we try to keep them that way. And we focus on areas with rare plants and that we're trying to protect. And then we focus on early detection species, which are invasives that have just started to show up and haven't really gotten a strong hold yet. And so that's usually where we can be most effective and actually have a chance of completely eradicating a species. There's one that comes to mind that folks should know about. It's called wavy leaf basket grass, and it's an invasive currently in Virginia and Maryland and perhaps southern Pennsylvania. We're working to map it. We're trying to understand exactly where it is along the trail, and the goal is to keep it from spreading north and south. And it's proven to be an extremely successful invasive species. It can completely cover an understory of a forest, just similar to Japanese stiltgrass, which if anyone's familiar with invasives, you're probably familiar with that one. It's the most prevalent in the United States, and it's all along the Appalachian Trail.
Wow. And now, and I'm sure a lot of people like me didn't know anything about this until the next one, I'll tell you what the next one is: boundary monitoring and encroachments. And this is something that Laurie Podeiger explained to me once. And frankly, I'd been utterly ignorant of the existence of the corridor until she spoke to me about it. For listeners who don't know about this, fill them in on some of the problems associated with it and what it is.
Sure. Well, it's funny because I think that both the natural resource work and the boundary corridor monitoring work are some of the programs and projects that we do that are a little lesser known. You know, they kind of take a back seat to trail work and cruise. And so I like to talk about them because people just aren't aware. We do maintain about 1,200 miles of exterior corridor boundary on Park Service lands for the Appalachian Trail. And so that means essentially we maintain 3 trails. So we've got the actual footpath blazed in white, and then on both sides, we've got somewhere, it may be a mile out, it may be a couple hundred feet away.
Is it as much as a mile in some cases?
Yep, the corridor can vary pretty widely. It's generally not a mile on Park Service lands, but in forest, that would be pretty common. So, we maintain actually 2 boundary lines, one on each side of the corridor. They're blazed in yellow. They're not going to be nice for hiking like the Appalachian Trail because they're not designed for the best path, right? They're the edge of a boundary. So sometimes they're right up the edge of a cliff. Our team actually goes out and keeps track of that. They clear that just enough so that they can access it. And there's monuments that they need to find and record. And then they blaze that so that we can continue to basically defend that boundary. It's a strong word, but there are a lot of encroachments that are documented every year. We have, on average, about 50 encroachments in the trail corridor.
Wow.
Each year, some of those are really severe. We have some areas that get really high use by ATVs. We sometimes have had...
And would they be aware of that, by the way, that they are encroaching?
Generally, yes. It's very well marked. So there's U.S. boundary markers all along the corridor so that when people are going in and out of it, they should be aware. Some people will say, claim ignorance, but... generally, we find that in areas where it's heavily used for ATV use and people just don't want to change their behavior.
Sure.
We've also had incidents.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one to do anything about, though, isn't it, really?
It is. It's definitely one of the issues that gets raised up to law enforcement, and we have to work with a lot of partners to try to communicate with the people who are doing those activities.
And then we actually get to something else that I certainly didn't know was a thing, visual resources, which sounds great. It says, as I understand it, you're putting together an inventory of the visual resources of the AT. Now, I wouldn't mind that job.
Yeah, right?
That's pretty damn nice. But I guess it has some significance apart from just great views on the trail, isn't it?
Right. Well, so the Appalachian Trail is a national scenic trail, and scenery and scenic resources are really a critical part of the AT experience and why it exists in the first place. So this is actually one of our newest projects. We are working to document and to evaluate the scenic quality at every viewpoint along the Appalachian Trail. It may take us many years. We started in 2019 with a pilot project, and we're continuing in 2021 with some full state inventories. And really, it's to wrap our heads around management and to figure out how do we keep these views as views? How do we maintain high quality views? And where do we really put energy when we have a threat to that scenic resource that deserves our attention?
Wow, that's massive. As I said to you, I didn't really understand the scope of the stuff you were doing. And are you a student of the history of science, by the way? The answer better be yes, by the way. I'm not sure if it is.
I suppose, yeah. So
Because if so, how have the approaches we talked about changed over the years? And looking into your crystal ball, what do you see as the coming problems in, say, 20 years or so?
Oh, interesting. So I would say I'm a student of this study of the history of science because I'm an ecologist by training, and so that's a component of it for sure.
Right.
We're really... I think the scientific method has long been in existence, but really the push has been to focus on repeatable and defensible research, right? So evaluating things in a system or in a method that we can continue to repeat, and that will really give us useful information on how things are changing. And so I think, to answer your second question, moving into the future, we're definitely taking a closer look at things like fragmentation of the trail corridor, wildlife movement, and so when we talk about land conservation and stewardship, we're really trying to look at the bigger picture of like, how does the Appalachian Trail fit into conservation in the eastern United States, and playing that role, what do we have to pay particular attention to, and at what scale?
Yeah, funny enough, I wondered this year, with less people on the trail this year, whether some of the species behave differently this year, some of the animal species.
I've heard that question. It's funny that you say less people, because I think we had less thru-hikers, but without great numbers to back it up, we did, but with just anecdotal evidence, we saw a lot of people on the trail this year. Right. So probably more visitation from like day hikers and weekend hikers.
Desperate to get out, no doubt.
Right, yeah.
and lastly, how can hikers help you?
Well, I think one of the best ways for hikers to help in general is to give back by joining a trail club or a trail crew if you're not in a location that you could be a regular contributor to a trail club. Sure. And I say that because our natural resource programs are really heavily supported by our clubs. We have volunteers that work on invasive species management. We have volunteers that monitor our rare plants. That's our longest running citizen science program for the Appalachian Trail, our rare plant program. And so that's the best way, really, I think, to engage for the long term and try to hold up a program if you work through the clubs. But we also have opportunities. We list them on our website whenever we have just, an outing or a field day and we need volunteer support. So I'd say pay attention.
So people should look under AppalachianTrail.org and look under volunteers, or how can where is it precisely?
So, well, our website has changed a lot recently, and I should know
Hasn't
better. But we have generally a calendar where we post all of our upcoming events that folks can engage with. And so I usually will make sure that if we have an event open to the public, that it appears on there.
Sure. Have you got any resources people can look at to learn more about the things you do? Because I say, I was kind of shocked at the breadth of stuff that you're responsible for, or the ATC actually do, and which is great for people to hear that sort of stuff. Is there anything they can read,
Yeah. Well, if you want some like heavy reading, I'm sure you can probably Google our resource management plan for the Appalachian Trail. We do have one, but yes, it's a pretty detailed document. We're, again, working on our website, and that's an area that we really want to improve so that folks have a better understanding of all that we do in terms of resource management. But I'd actually say that currently our Instagram and our social media is probably the most up-to-date and relevant when it comes to the kind of work that we're doing. I've been working a lot with our media team to just get some posts out there about projects that we've been up to. And so I would say pay attention to our Instagram feed, and you might learn more than you expect.
Okay. Well, look, this is such a broad subject, and I've asked you to do it quickly. You've been very gracious with your time and done it in a way in which I think people at least can understand the various points you gave. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to me.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Wow, what a subject, eh? I thought it was fascinating, and I say this as somebody to whom science is just a word and not a concept I really understand. But I thought Marion had a great way of explaining herself, and even I was able to get the drift of what she was saying. How do you think these ATC segments are going? Personally, I think they're giving us all a broader picture of what the organisation is all about, and I hope they're all getting as much out of it as I am. Thanks, as always, goes to those of you who have donated to the shows this week. Lisa Rana and Terry Stewart are two of our monthly donors, so I'd love to thank both of you ladies for your kindness once more. It was particularly helpful this week as I had to spend $100 on new software to record my Skype calls. Fortunately, by the generosity of my listeners, I was able to go ahead and get it. Thank you, ladies, and everybody else who finds our donate button on any of the pages of our hikingradionetwork.com site. Now, as I mentioned, on the Wednesday morning after the election, it's Mr. President. Well, of all days to say this, we're back on with Mr. President. Hi, Bill. How are you? How do you feel this post-election morning?
Hey, Blue, I'm exhausted from watching some of the results.
Oh, dear. It has been exhausting. Now, has it been as exhausting as your hiking this week, or has that been quite nice? Because, and the reason I ask is you sent me, it looks like you sent me these notes, but it looks like you've been basically hopping from one lovely hostel to another. So how's that gone for you?
It's been going great, but, in terms of energy levels, I think you would say this too, Blue. You've got physical energy levels and you have mental energy levels.
Absolutely.
And I think my physical energy levels are fine. They're great.
Yeah.
It's the emotional roller coaster of coming to the close of the hike soon and this crazy election.
Yeah,
So,
I would think that, I think everybody gets this when they come towards the end of their hike. And in your case, it's coming to the end of a triple crown, which is even more significant in many ways. So how are you feeling about that? I know you've got these real life problems you want to address back home, but how are you feeling about coming to the end of this journey?
I'm feeling very thankful. And I think this kind of goes in line with my visit to the Woods Hole Hostel, because I'm sure you remember, Blue, when you're at the hostel, each night before dinner, you give thanks.
Gratitude ceremony.
And gratitude, yeah. And, I haven't done something like that in a long time. And it did make me really think about, finishing this Triple Crown. My overwhelming emotion isn't one of like pride or anything like that. It's one of gratitude, because I think to finish a Triple Crown, it really takes, I said this to some folks there, it doesn't take a village, it takes many villages, to do it.
Sure.
Just so many people supporting you, people who you do not know many times. And I'm just really, really thankful for both the hikers I've hiked with, the people that have been, friends and family supporting me, and all these towns and people across the country that have opened their homes, their car doors, everything to us. So I'm just really thankful, really, really grateful for the experience and for all the folks that have made it possible.
Well, I'm glad you had that experience at Neville's place, at Woods Hole, because, I'd already been there before, obviously, but having had the weekend retreat we had there not too long ago, I'd forgotten how important that gratitude circle is at the start of every meal, where you'd hold hands, but of course in these COVID times we don't hold hands, but you then say something you're grateful for, and it really makes you think about how grateful you are. And then once you do that before every meal, it makes you realize how much you've got to be grateful for, doesn't it?
It does, and I'll tell you, I'm glad I actually was there 2 nights.
Cool. Quite right too.
And I'm glad I got 2 chances at the gratitude ceremony, because the first one, I'm not sure if when you were there, you met all of the wonderful dogs that she has at the hostel.
No, I'm not a dog person.
Oh, you're not? Yeah. Well, I love dogs, and she had this one dog I just kind of fell in love with. So for my first gratitude ceremony, I said I was thankful for the fact that Neville was going to allow me to choose, a dog of my choosing to take with me. And I was joking, of course.
Cool.
I really wanted that dog. But on the second ceremony, the next night, I was able to actually be more reflective and really think through what I'm grateful for. I feel it was maybe not a coincidence that Woods Hole Hostel was a place at the end of my hike, or close to the end.
I think you're right. And as I said in your notes, you then went on to Weary Feet. Big Walker? What's Big Walker? I've never been there.
Oh, it's a motel in Bland.
Right.
Terrible name for a town.
Yes, it's a shocking name for a town. Yeah, you're right. And Weary Feet's a new one on the map, and we actually went there as part of the beginning of our Woods Hole weekend, so that was kind of nice. Have you enjoyed staying at these different places now you're into Virginia?
Yeah, I have enjoyed it, and it's really interesting to see how, because I think as you head south, the hostels are more plentiful.
Sure.
But they're all very different, you know.
They
I
are.
felt like the hostels the hostels up north are all kind of very standard and kind of the same. They've got bunk rooms and a process for everything. Whereas out down south, it's kind of like each hostel has its very own feel. You know, like, you know, Woods Hole, it's this beautiful property in the woods, cabin-like feeling. Weary Feet is an old estate with like slave quarters.
Yes, right.
It's very strange.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
it's just like these very different experiences and different. It makes you think about different things.
Yeah.
And the history of the trail kind of peeks through in some of these hostels. So
nice.
But I have enjoyed it, and it has been getting really cold. So we went to a couple nights, Blue, where it was 23 degrees.
Wow, that's really dropped. And you mentioned cold weather in your text to me, but you also said after that you actually had snow on Chestnut Knob. What a place to see snow!
Yeah. Now I will say it was a little bit of snow, but you know, it wasn't a lot, but it was beautiful dusting, and the view up there, as you know, is just incredible. And we were really lucky to have the shelter at Chestnut Knob because it's, you know, it's actually an enclosed cement cabin, which was very helpful. Although I will say it doesn't have a fireplace. It has a drawn-on fireplace. Like someone drew a fireplace in the wall, which is not helpful.
That doesn't line up. It doesn't line up terribly well, does it? Actually, I stayed outside Chestnut Knob last time I went, and I just loved that view. You get over God's thumbprint, but I think it's called Burke's Garden, but it's known colloquially as or locally as God's thumbprint. And I just love that spot, Chestnut Knob Shelter, and that whole area up there. I just love it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's beautiful. But, you know, hiking up to it, because we actually did a 23-mile day to get to it.
Wow.
Because, we knew that the temperature was dropping, and basically the wind was picking up. Right. So I didn't get there till about 8:30 at night, and the trees were just bending in the wind. It must have been 50-mile-an-hour gusts.
Wow.
And it was super cold. And so we knew that it would be safer to stay in the Chestnut Knob Shelter, which is an actual enclosed cabin with no trees near it, than try to camp out at some of the campsites that were, you know, earlier on in the day. Yeah. That kind of highlights, you know, there's kind of some unique challenges to fall hiking that folks, you know.
Well, there are, but it's not only fault, but every part of hiking the AT, if you do it at different times, you'll experience a different thing. And you've listed the various things to do with fall hiking. You know, one of which is hunting season. By the way, they haven't shot you, have they?
Oh, you know what? It's funny because when we were at Weary Feet Hostel, the one of the owners came into our room before, like around 9 o'clock at night, and said, "Just so you know, tomorrow is muzzle loading season, day 1. Y'all should be very careful."
Oh my
we were like, what does that even mean? And so luckily I hike with an orange shirt, but
that's right.
You know, we were hearing blasts, you know, very loud blasts.
Wow.
And, you know, normally hunters, I think, are pretty aware of where the trail is. It's not, you know, I don't want to overestimate the danger of hiking during hunting season. It's relatively safe, but you should wear bright clothing.
Yes,
so we made sure to do that.
Yeah, and you mentioned wind. Is that become quite an issue now then? And I presume that's blowing a lot of the leaves off the trees, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so the wind was so heavy, and I think on these shoulder seasons, you always hear about spring. You know, it gets very windy, but it can get really windy when the weather shifts from really warm, which it was, to really cold.
Right.
And it felt like, you know, we the next morning after a night of all that wind, we just saw limbs of trees in the ground and branches, and there were barely any leaves left on the trees.
Were you prepared weather-wise? Because, you know, you've had such nice warm weather. Did you know this was coming in the forecast, and did you have sufficient clothing to cope with that?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I always, you know, being cold is one of the worst things you can possibly experience. So I'm always prepared for that. My strategy for cold, I have a down jacket like almost everybody else has, but I actually, instead of having, you know, frog togs or a very flimsy rain covering, I have an actual Mountain Hardwear shell with Gore-Tex. And when I put that over my down jacket, I mean, there's almost no weather that I could encounter that would make me cold while wearing that.
Wow. That's a good recommendation.
I also have, I highly recommend that. And the shell is only like maybe 9 ounces. It's not even that heavy, so it's worth having in there. It's also great for rain, of course, but
yeah, of course.
I also have, this is a luxury item, but one I highly recommend because it's pretty light. But I have down booties that I put on at night.
Yeah, that wouldn't work for me at all. I can't imagine padding around camp in down booties. I presume that's what you get in your tent by yourself.
Exactly, yeah. And they're not really designed for walking outside. It's just for in the sleeping bag, but my goodness, it makes those feet so comfy at night.
That is nice. I must admit, that's nice. The other one of your hiking hazards in Virginia in fall was cow poop. I mean, that's a hazard pretty much throughout the year, isn't it?
Well, it's kind of like PTSD coming back to me because hiking the Continental Divide, you're dodging cow poop most of the time.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, and I hadn't seen that in a long time, and there's just a lot of it here in southwestern Virginia. So you got to watch out for that. And then, when you're crossing a muddy area, you don't know what's cow poop and what's mud. So you have to be especially, cautious there.
Yeah. And you say you're in Atkins now? Is it Atkins?
Yeah, Atkins/rural retreat. And we stopped here mostly so I could watch the election.
How many miles you got to go then?
Well, officially to finish, I've got about 76 left.
Wow.
But I'm gonna push on to Boots Off Hostel, I think, with Bad Bunny and Zippy, right, because it's a great place. Like, they offer great shuttle services. They can get me to a rental car.
Terrific place.
Yeah, it's a little bit. It's also where I had technically started my hike, even though I hiked Damascus to Georgia last year. I parked my car at Boots Off. So it'll be kind of a nice actual ending.
Yes, and it's a great place as well. It's a he runs a really, is it Jim, the guy? He runs a really relaxed place, and it's got these great little mini cabins as well, which are well worth getting, which is what I had myself. And you also had Halloween there somewhere, didn't you? What was that? What happened there?
I sent you a picture, and this is where I just love when people kind of push you to do things you wouldn't normally do. Zippy and Bad Bunny, they had their costumes ready like a month ago. They've been hiking with them.
Really?
And their costumes were Alice in Wonderland themed. So Zippy was Alice, and Bad Bunny, of course, was the rabbit. Right. And so at the Weary Feet Hostel, we took some cardboard and we made a Mad Hatter costume for me.
Oh, dude, that's so good. You seem to really, really. I've been listening back to a couple of my conversations with you just to recap where we are recently. You seem to have really, really dived into the fact that it's ending and you're just enjoying yourself out there now. Quite apart from being on the hike, you're actually enjoying yourself as an experience right now, aren't you?
I really am. And yeah, I just I'm lucky that I'm in a position to do that. I know that not everybody is, so I recognize that, I know that not everyone can have this sort of experience, but I really am trying to take as much advantage of it as I possibly can, in honor of all those folks that have made it possible for me.
Damn right. Yeah, and I'm glad you said that as well, because no one does this alone. I know this is a bit of a theme that's been, in some cases, every now and then throughout this election. No one does this alone. No one has their life alone. Sometimes people are lonely, but everybody has some support somewhere, and recognizing that support is, so important. So, what date you got now? Then we're now on the Wednesday, the 4th. When do you actually expect to finish, or are you going to finish at Boots Off?
I think probably the 9th or 10th is the goal.
Okay.
And that's like 2 days later than I thought I would, but that's because I'm adding like 40-ish miles to the end. But that's okay. I mean, I'd keep hiking if I could, but I just got all these things.
Real life is beckoning, man. Real life is beckoning. Don't you worry. And when you get back, and I've said this to people before, I have never got over my first hike, and that's 6 years ago. I've never got over it, and I think I've recognized what it did to me, and I love that what happened to me on that hike. But I think about that hike every day as I think about last year's hike every day. So none of this is going to go away from you, and I'm sure you've got other. You've got the PCT and the CDT also to look back on. Of the three you've done now, where do they? I mean, which one do you prefer?
It's a valid question, Blue, but I think it's like trying to choose a favorite child, you know.
I've got one of those as well.
Yeah, and I don't even have children, but I'll say it's like trying to pick a favorite niece, let's say.
Okay.
But you know, I would say that I just love the PCT for its. It was. I'm glad I started with that trail because it was so forgiving, you know.
Yeah, sure.
And so rewarding. Forgiving and rewarding is, I think, what I would say. I think of the trails, it's the most forgiving and the most rewarding. But the CDT is the most. It will test you the hardest, but what an adventure! It's the most adventurous of the three trails, and
sure.
I really was. No other trail can provide anywhere near the adventure that trail will provide you. But the AT, it is all about, for me, it's all about the people and the social experience. And, yeah, I mean, I didn't even think I wanted that, you know?
Isn't that interesting?
I think it's why I did it last. I wasn't really looking forward to it, but now I'm really, I am blown away by how much this trail has provided me and how much I've enjoyed it. So
I'm so pleased you said that. You know, it's been a privilege to follow you as you do this because you just had such a blast. But you know, we're going to catch up again next week, and hopefully, we'll catch you in boots off, and you can perhaps get Jim on the phone as well.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool. That'd be great.
Cool. Okay,
yeah.
All right, mate. Well, you take it easy, okay? And you clearly are doing anyway. and enjoy the rest of your election watching today, and we'll catch up next week.
All right, thanks, Blue.
Okay, man. Take it easy. Bye.
Take care.
What a blast he's having. And I was glad he mentioned the gratitude circle at Woods Hole. Some of you may do this regularly at home, but it was new to me, so I found it to be a wonderful prelude to the meals I had there. And Bill will be done by next week. As I believe I mentioned previously, I'll be going with the AT segments only between now and the end of the year as our middle section of the show. Remember, I'd like to hear from you if you have any good ideas on how I might fill the middle section next year. Just before we hear how Fozzie gets to Katahdin, I'm still looking around for a book to read after next week, when we hear his last chapter. I've got a few irons in the fire, but I'm always happy to hear suggestions, so please reach out, either via microphone on our website for a personal message to me, or email me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com. Cheers. So now, it is the last leg of the journey for Fozzie and his team, and I must say, I got quite nostalgic reading and recording this earlier this week. It took me right back there to the mounting excitement of the 100-mile wilderness and those epic views of Katahdin you get, topped off by the view as you get out of the wilderness and just stare across at the mountain from Abel Bridge. As I say, bloody epic. I'll see you next week. Chapter 14. Why didn't anyone tell me about Maine? August the 9th to August the 27th, mile 1953 to 2184. Old Blue wasn't an ageing hillbilly. A mountain had claimed the name. My approach descended from Moody Mountain to a wide col which curved to the summit. I flew, making short work of the ascent, hauling myself over ledges. My shoes clung to smooth granite, fueling confidence to plough upwards with firm steps, hopping and jumping through the traverse. I dropped my pack at the top to rest. I preferred the summits for breaks because I'd be straight into a descent afterwards. Krumholtz surrounded me as I leant against a weather-beaten post, topped with a sign for Old Blue itself. The short trees afforded a 360-degree view for miles. A clear wear line etched a passage over the rocks below. It was quiet. I heard little except bird calls. I squinted as the sun's light bounced and ricocheted. A storm raged to the south, angry clouds crowning a distant mountain. I calculated Lasagna and Thirsty's whereabouts. They had 10 miles on me, but I'd started early, so I figured they were 2 hours ahead. I knew how they both approached the trail and their mileage, and predicted they'd finish at the Sabbath Day Pond lean-to, leaving me 20 miles. Pleased with my estimation, I found them sunbathing at Moxie Pond, half a mile before the lean-to. "How we doing?" I asked. "Okay," Thirsty replied. "Not 100%, but a shitload better than yesterday." Old Blue impressed me, but Moxie Pond was pure nirvana. A thin strip of beach lined the shore before meeting the forest edge. Sand shelved to meet the calm waters stretching to the horizon, framed by symmetrical hills plunging into the water. Despite a lack of winds, the mosquitoes were on vacation. We sat on the warm sand, took an occasional dip and relaxed. I broke the silence. Anyone heard from Goggles? Lasagna looked over, squinting into the sun. No, but I expect he's at least 10 ahead. He'll need 25 to 30s to meet his mum. I don't think we'll see him. You two aren't hot on his heels then? Are you taking it easy? Thirsty sat upright and joined the conversation. Yep, you got it. This was splendid news. Although I missed Goggles, I didn't intend catching him. My plan to drop the mileage and slow for the last 230 miles had rubbed off on the guys, and the subject appeared closed. But having lost one member, our team remained solid. Lasagna, in his pursuit of the hyperlight pack, had ditched his tarp, trekking poles and one of his quilts. His further weight-saving philosophy meant utilising the shelters. This made sense, but it depended on them having space. It rained during the early hours, and I left, hiking briskly to warm up. I passed a new face, Catwoman, at the Sabbath Day Pond lean-to, but I didn't stop to chat as we acknowledged each other. The guys caught me and we dodged rain showers, progressing cautiously over wet ground and slick rock. The town of Rangeley lay 9 miles west along the ME4. Luck blessed us with a ride and we resupplied. Main shelters are called lean-tos, and the Piazza Rock lean-to was home for the night. Thirsty continued, but threatening clouds forced me and Lasagna to grab a spot inside. Ches, Levin and Grok arrived, a wonderful surprise, and prepared their beds along with Catwoman. A sign on the privy read, "Your move." Curious, I checked inside to see 2 seats for doing one's business, and a cribbage board lay between them. Why take a crap next to someone else, or even indulge in cribbage as well? It did at least have a roof to stop me getting wet. Toilet stops in the wet presented many logistical problems, except for those, like me, with umbrellas. The rain didn't ease overnight. Lasagna and I watched a few Sobos head off, the warmth of our beds doing little to encourage hiking. The forecast was dire. Rain and low temperatures. The only solution was a Trail Zero. Trail Zeros are self-explanatory. Instead of resting in town, you do it on the trail. I'd only entertained one, on the PCT in the Sierra Nevada. The scenery alone was enough to experience it for a day. At Piazza Rock, the weather decided for us. Our gear was damp, so it made sense to dry it, start a fire for warmth and play chess. Plus, rest fitted with our new slowing down philosophy. We played 2 games. I won the first to level the scores at 5 apiece. I sensed the opportunity to pull away from America, and I focused. Culminating in a masterly pincer movement, utilising my queen and knight to finish Lasagna, I punched the air. I held his phone aloft, and the winning words echoed around the shelter. Checkmate! Distracted by the game, I'd forgotten my shoes were drying by the fire. Grok grabbed my right shoe, tossing it between his hands, the heat too much for him to hold. A faint wisp of smoke curled upwards. "These yours, Fuzzy?" "Shit," I cried. "Are they okay?" A section of sole had bubbled, but they remained intact. We tended the fire, with Grok taking it to heart, caring for it like a treasured possession. He checked the flames often, adjusted the fuel to offer more air, blew on the embers and placed piles of wet wood on the surrounding stone to dry. Between rain showers, we breathed life into our heating system, sitting at the fire edge, chatting. Its flickering light danced around the lean-to and glowed against the trees before Maine's darkness engulfed it. I sensed somberness in the happiness, and I too felt sad. The prospect of finishing was palpable. Mixed feelings play havoc with my moods at the end of thru-hikes. Ecstatic with impending success, I pondered life after the trail. My emotions ran riot on the final stretch. It's rare for other accomplishments to match the high of completion. I felt poignant. Thoughts turned to family and friends, those I loved, and the burden of returning to civilization weighed heavy. My drummer mania dormant, satiated by time outside, rested. But I knew that with little sympathy found in the cold, dark winter months, the nomad would stir. I sensed it in others. Campfire conversations inevitably turned to home, and my hiking friends touched the surface of life after the trail. It's confusing coping with the elation of success and the sombre notion of not only returning, but never through hiking again. Many are fortunate to hike a long trail, but the upheaval of finances, leaving loved ones and jobs means it's often their first and last. That's a tough prospect. Many cry, others are reserved. I was often tearful, and despite knowing why, it caught me unawares. On top of my game 1 minute, flying through the woods with the sun on my face, without cares, and bam, I sobbed. I'm closed with my emotions, so I battled feelings and shed tears privately. A past failed relationship weighed heavy and refused to fade. These mixed feelings were, strangely, calming, and I tempered them further by planning my next trip. I often tempered sad thoughts with future hiking plans to censor the melancholy. It satisfied my wandering side. I woke at 3 a.m, feeling overwhelmingly ill. I rubbed my eyes and focused. I felt terrible and needed the toilet pronto. Cribbage wasn't on my mind as I raced to the privy's faint silhouette with clenched buttocks, stumbling on the uneven ground. With seconds to spare, I lifted the lid, sat and relaxed. As my bowels emptied, the consistency wasn't optimal. The splashing sound from the inner depths suggested my stomach had taken a turn for the worse. I shuffled nauseously back to the lean-to and crawled under my quilt. By 10 a.m, after 5 more emergency visits, I'd spent more time in the privy than my sleeping bag. Grok and Lasagna had left for the climb to Saddleback Mountain. Confused, I assumed norovirus had caused my Andover layup and I'd recovered. On reflection, it must have been a different infection, especially as I hadn't suffered with vomiting. I felt fatigued and nauseous, and one thing was sure, I wasn't going anywhere for a second day. I settled for a second trail zero. Fozzie! I looked up to see an old friend approaching, and it cheered me. Juggles, where have you been? He laughed. Where have you been? Where's everyone? Lasagna? Thirsty? Goggles? Why are you here? He paused on his approach. Are you sick? That's a lot of questions, Mr. World Champion. Answers in order. They're hiking. Lasagna left this morning. Not sure about Thirsty. Goggles is way ahead and not with us anymore. I've got norovirus, which answers your last question. Yes, I'm not well. He stopped, eyed me cautiously, but hugged me. I hesitated, but relented. Don't get too close. Have you had the bug yet? No, I've been lucky, he said. At midday, Juggles had no reason to stop. I asked him to tell the others I'd leave the following day. With no more visitors, I had the place to myself. I continued to drink water with rehydration powder, along with mouthfuls of sugar and a little salt. As my toilet trips lessened, my nausea faded and my energy levels increased. My hunger returned. I cooked dinner and picked on nuts through the evening. Despite my almond supplies, a squirrel disliked my presence in camp. He screamed at me loudly in the afternoon, jumping around in a tree as if throwing a tantrum, unable to get his own way. He's a local, the lean-to caretaker explained, checking on my progress. Thinks he owns the place, resents visitors and airs his feelings. At bedtime, I'd improved and decided to leave early the next morning. I hoped Juggles would replace our absent team member, making us 4 once more. With no privy visits during the night, I made a coffee, devoured a bowl of porridge and left by 6:30 a.m. I felt strong, amazed at my recovery speed. Saddleback towered 2,000 feet above, but surrounded by trees I couldn't see it. After a mile I passed Ethel Pond, where a low mist hung motionless over the water. Only splashing fish disturbed the silence. I thrived on views, and the expectation was as exciting. Saddleback was no exception and became a favourite. Endless hills rolled in every direction. Bands of clouds stretched across the sky, their ivory tops blending to darker bellies, threatening rain. A rocky path swept away, curving around Saddleback's north side before plummeting into the trees. I saw no one and took an hour at the summit to rest, surveying my world. My illness defeated, I'd returned, another adversary conquered. I stood firm, leaning into a raging wind, arms outstretched, and screamed, "I'm free!" The English can be reserved. If we're having a wonderful day, we rarely voice our thoughts, but linger in the emotion. The Americans, more unabashed, express themselves freely. On sunny days or during lively conversations around a campfire, they aired elation by exclaiming, "Good times." It puzzled me because sharing vocally went against my introversion. I often let happiness pass without revelling in it, but recognising it in the moment, and registering it records it for posterity. Verbalising joy formed vivid recollections for years after. Maybe I remembered because I found others saying "good times" unusual. I fondly recalled my American friends on past hikes expressing their euphoria, and it stayed with me. Lasagna had messaged me that they were in Stratton, and I raised the thumb when I reached the road. Brian pulled over on his way to work. "Where are you heading? Stratton for breakfast?" I raised my other thumb. He read my mind. I swung open the door of the diner, and Lasagna, Thirsty and Juggles smiled. Lasagna tried to speak with a mouthful of bacon and eggs. "You okay, Fozzie?" I raised my thumb for the 3rd time in 30 minutes. "Fighting fit and into the fray. How's the breakfast?" Thirsty chased a hash brown down with his coffee. "Awesome." The Stratton Motel and Hostel was over the road. The owner allowed me to use the laundry facilities, and waiting for my clothes to dry, a note pinned to the wall caught my attention. It concerned Paul Parkside Bernhardt, who'd started through hiking well before me on February the 17th. Registered as the 11th to start, he was at the front of the pack. Making camp 33 miles from Stratton, he swam in Pierce Pond on a hot afternoon. Shortly after, those at the shelter heard cries from the pond and raced to see Paul sink under the water. He never surfaced. Despite brave attempts by Achilles and Carpenter, they couldn't find him. Rescue workers retrieved his body in the evening. The cause of death is unknown, but thought to have been cramp. Parkside had covered a 20-mile day. Not a long day for a fit hiker laid in the trail, but a hard day's hike, taking the terrain and heat into account. Low potassium levels may have played a part as well as the chilly water. Achilles, Dropout, Germinator, Swivel, Spiral and Catwoman took time out from the trail to attend Paul's funeral in Queens, New York. 2 weeks later, on June the 29th, they carried his ashes to the summit of Mount Katahdin. I assumed the Catwoman I had met was the same hiker and had returned. I didn't see her again to ask. Over the years, a few hikers haven't returned. Even worse was the fear that I, one day, could be one of them. Many disappearances happen in Maine. With such hazardous terrain, one slip could mean falling into inaccessible areas at the base of cliffs or notches. It's a sad thought we don't dwell on. The clothes dryer beeped, shaking me from my musings. Rain fell and we paused, contemplating staying at the hostel, but we caught a ride to the trailhead and hiked the 5 miles to Horns Pond Lean-To. The caretaker arrived and took time with us, expressing his sadness surrounding the events at Pierce Pond. He confirmed Avery Peak, 3.5 miles further, was the last major mountain of the AT, except for Katahdin itself. It was downhill to East Flagstaff Lake. The final, flatter section we'd studied in our data books was close. We had 183 miles left to call ourselves AT thru-hikers. Light rain fell as we broke camp in the morning, and clouds tickled the mountain tops. We climbed strongly and reached South Horn first, with views of Bigelow Mountain's West Peak ahead. Despite heavier rain and ferocious wind, we summited Avery Peak and sheltered. We smiled. Nothing could stop us now, not even Katahdin. That icon was the last arduous climb in a stretch of mountains, 2,000 miles and 138 days behind us. We dropped from Avery, meeting the East Flagstaff Road where our total mileage exceeded 2,000. For the second time in my life, I'd passed this point. We marked the moment by taking a soft rock and writing 2,000 on the tarmac. We stopped after 13 miles with excellent reason. East Flagstaff Lake glinted through the trees, bordered by an inviting beach. With more rain due, it was a decent excuse to stop, but secretly we knew the end was close. The fewer miles we hiked each day, the more we'd stretch out our remaining time. Lasagna, without a shelter, continued to the West Carry Pond lean-to whilst Juggles, Thirsty and I made camp on the beach, alternating between swimming and resting before the rain came. The padding on my tarp didn't stop all night, but I found it comforting and slept soundly. The following day, indulging our decision to slow, we stayed put in the wet conditions. The temperature dropped overnight, and I woke to pull on a jacket. I knew the chill was caused by clearing clouds, and I hoped for a bright day. It didn't disappoint. Loons announced the morning, a gentle breeze lifted the tarp, and lapping water woke me. Water crossings were common in Maine, as were wet feet. The Kennebec River, thankfully, proved an exception. With its fast-flowing water and wide berth, safety was paramount, so transport was laid on. Dave Corrigan of the Kennebec River AT ferry service waved from the opposite bank. He launched his canoe quicker than an otter taking a dip. He briefed us on safety and what to expect. With room for only 2 hikers, I went first with Thirsty, figuring if anyone could paddle strongly, he could. Juggles and Lasagna waited for the return voyage. Dave had ferried 1,500 hikers already, and with the Nobos arriving in force, he was busy. Out of the mountains and in kinder terrain, we had one final test of our resolve. The ME-15 heralded the start of the 100-mile wilderness. It ended at Abor Bridge, 15 miles from the finish. Nobos often caught rides to Monson, 4 miles east, to resupply before the section. The 100-mile wilderness explained itself. No towns, no road crossings, except the occasional desolate logging track. We'd figured on 5 20-mile days to get through. We considered 4 and even 3 days, but with our exploits finishing, we wanted to make the most of it. We secured a quick ride into Monson, where Shaw's Lodging provided a bed for 2 nights. A final 0 gave us the chance to get cleaned and resupplied for the last assault. Returning from lunch at the Lakeshore pub, a car pulled over and Snot Rocket, Anchor and Chef stepped out. I hadn't seen them for weeks and we hugged freely. We don't realise we leave hikers on trail thinking we'll see them again when often we don't. It's sobering and the sadness bites. Thru-hikers know this and cherish time spent with others. When lost friends show unexpectedly, it's a terrific feeling. The Lakeshore pub, the only place serving draft beer, tempted me back in the evening where I sat with Lasagna, Thirsty and Juggles. Juggles squealed and passed me his phone. Goggles made it. He reached Katahdin today. I looked at the photo of him, astride the summit sign, proudly holding a Wisconsin flag. Despite the significant news, I knew Goggles was someone else I may never see again. He's on his way home now, I said. What will you do when you get home, Juggles? A different kind of survival, he answered wisely, as Thirsty and Lasagna smiled, nodding in silent approval. We left Monson for the 100-mile wilderness in no hurry, keen to eke out every minute. A campsite caught our eye late afternoon, but reaching it meant fording Little Wilson Stream. Lasagna crossed last, and when the rest of us had made it, we turned to check on his progress. Halfway over, he threw his pack to the bank so he could wade unencumbered. Before we could grab it, it slid to the bank, gaining momentum before dropping in the water and floating towards Little Wilson Falls. Little wasn't the first adjective which sprung to mind for the cascade. Lasagna screamed, leaping to foil his pack's escape attempt. He fell sideways into the water, resurfacing in time to grab it before it disappeared over the falls. I left before the others had broken camp, negotiating Little Wilson carefully. Maine continued to amaze me with its dense forest, regular river crossings and quiet hiking. I drifted off, occupied with thoughts of finishing. 3,650 feet of Whitecap Mountain rose before me. I'd missed it while checking the last flat section of trail in my logbook. I filled my bottle from a stream near the Carl A. Newhall lean-to, where Meat, whom I'd just met, joined me. I sat on a rock, drinking the cool water. Meat, after several months, I still look at mountains and doubt my ability to climb them. He laughed, pausing from filtering. I know what you mean. I do the same. See you at the top? Hell yeah! A side trail on White Peak's summit offered the first view of something we'd spent months dreaming of. I turned north through the woods and emerged into the open. The land swept away, rippled through lowlands, dotted with lakes, and rose majestically. My eyes eased upward to settle on a sight I thought I'd never see. I cried as emotions caught me out. 73 trail miles north, Mount Katahdin soared skywards to command dominance. The upper plateau, the tableland, was visible. Forest crept around its lower flanks, surrendering to the harsher conditions. I counted on the fine weather holding. I'd be on the summit in days. Whitecap behind me, the trail settled to the level section I'd hoped for. A smooth trail wove through the forest and cushioned my feet with soft soil and a sprinkling of pine needles. I hiked to a waterside camp at Namakanta Lake, where the guys arrived later. We discussed logistics in the evening, agreed on a 3:45 a.m. alarm call and a 4:30 a.m. start. We wanted to see Katahdin at first light, around 5:30 a.m., and the Sunderment Mountain was a grand vantage point. I struggle with early mornings on trail, especially that early. Leaving my sleeping bag in the chill and darkness doesn't compute. I usually waited until someone else stirred before moving myself. The next morning we took a side trail on the Sunderment to a cliff where the trees cleared. Sitting near the edge, our finishing point was clearly visible. An orange glow brushed the eastern skies, softened by blankets of mist trapped in the valleys. Katahdin's silhouette beckoned. On the afternoon of August the 25th, I emerged from the 100-mile wilderness onto Golden Road, grabbing my sunglasses as the light caught me off guard. The only signs of life were the cafe and store. With a dangerous hunger and a fat yearning, I ordered 2 large burgers, 2 packets of crisps, ice cream, 3 coffees, a chocolate milk and an orange juice. My choice wouldn't have graced the cover of any nutritional health magazines. Lying on the ground after my indulgence, my stomach regretted it. I wobbled over to the Abel Pines campsite where Lasagna, Thirsty and Juggles warmed by a campfire and watched the Penobscot River glide past. We woke to find Juggles missing. He'd mentioned getting a ride to Millinocket, 19 miles east, to collect his juggling batons from the post office. His Katahdin finale was to juggle with fire on the summit. We intended to take the weather window on Monday, 2 days away, so he could join us for the finish. We sent him a text to let him know. He suspected he'd fractured a toe, but in true thru-hiker spirit, he didn't intend to visit a doctor for fear of confirmation. Meat relayed news about Danish, who I'd met 2 days before. Danish, on his second AT attempt, had run out of time the year before because his visa expired. Meat cringed. got one foot caught in a tree root. Momentum carried him forward and snapped his tibia and fibula. Oh shit, so he's out again? Yep, but knowing Danish, he'll be back. I enjoyed a short day to the Birches lean-to. 15 others had congregated for the final approach on the hike to Katahdin the next day. Base camp bustled. Juggles showed, and along with my regular companions, Thirsty and Lasagna, we had Pedestrian, Houdini, Great Dane, Banjo, Meat, Skunk Ape, Roadhouse, Chesty, Stingray, Poncho and Jonathan the caretaker for company. We built a roaring fire in the evening, and Houdini held a smudging ceremony. Common amongst the Native Americans, smudging, or purifying the air by burning herbs, creates a positive atmosphere. Sage is a popular choice, but Houdini, unable to find any, has settled for cedar, a noble alternative. We congregated in a circle around the fire. He lit the cedar and smudged each of us with the aid of a feather, and explained the ceremony. He invited us to speak of our experience. The feather held much significance, because whoever spoke held it, and everyone else had to be silent. When one finished, they handed it to the next person. It was an enlightening ceremony, poignant because we respected the feather and those speaking without interruptions. Group discussions are sport by interruptions, and we lack patience to listen. I learnt much from it. It's a shame we can't follow this principle in normal life. Stories were told openly, and we laughed, joked, pondered, reflected, left for our beds feeling positive. My thoughts centred on a rumour suggesting Katahdin was the first landmass in America to witness the rising sun. But after researching, I discovered it wasn't true. According to the time of year and the equinoxes, Cadillac Hill, Mars Hill and West Quoddy Head shared the accolade. However, Katahdin was right up there, and I intended to see it. I peered in annoyance at my alarm, which broke my slumber at 2 a.m. I packed and waited for Lasagna, who had agreed to join me, but he didn't stir. At 2:25 a.m, I left for my final day on the Appalachian Trail. I glimpsed star-studded skies through breaks in the trees. Warming, I removed clothing, settling on shorts and a t-shirt. The hiss of Katahdin stream falls filtered through the woods as I passed and faded. Frogs hopped out of my way as my head torch picked out the white blazes. Not even a mosquito drone spoilt the silence, and occasionally I stopped, turned off my light and looked skyward to swaying pines framing a magical night sky. I caught Skunk Ape, who had started minutes before me, fumbling with his failing head torch. I offered to share my light. As the going steepened, I took the lead, crawling and scrambling over rock slabs, occasionally turning to shine my light for him. After 3 miles at 4,538 feet, the ascent eased onto the tableland. Meagre light spread from a glowing horizon and picked out our passage through the rocks. An occasional lonely white blaze caught the dawn fire. I turned to see head torches behind, sweeping around the landscape, lost astronauts on a distant planet. Backlit with orange and rightly commanding a solitary presence on stage, the silhouetted, iconic sign I'd seen so many times in photos straddled the summit. At 5:15 a.m, 3 hours after leaving, I placed my palms on its cold, damp surface and ran my fingers over the carved letters. Katahdin, Baxter Peak, elevation 5,267 feet, northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail. A mountain footpath extending over 2,000 miles to Springer Mountain, Georgia. A fierce wind ripped over the tableland. I pulled on my jacket and sheltered behind rocks with Skunk Ape, soon joined by Banjo and Meat. We faced east and watched, mesmerised but impatient for our sunrise. At 5:51 a.m, a hazy, ruby circle poked over the horizon, battling for supremacy with lingering cloud. The knife-edge ridge to our right illuminated, dropping and arcing away to the north. The light met our faces, inching down our chests as Katahdin brightened. I stayed for 3 hours, observing the changing light, the shortening shadows, and felt the temperature rise. After weeks of carrying my imaginary gauntlet, I launched it over the side of Katahdin, watching it plunge before smashing and disintegrating into 1,000 pieces. I heard footsteps behind. Yeah! Yeah! I peered around to see Thirsty, beyond excitement, punch the air and yell. Lasagna arrived and Juggles, somewhat emotional, greeted me with a wobbly lip and watery eyes. Others filtered in, and from a quiet, reflective and silent atmosphere, the mood turned to jubilation. Juggles lit his battens, and the flames caught, licking skyward. He balanced on the sign, plying his trade for several minutes to rapturous applause and no drops. After a group photo I left, turning occasionally to remember the view. Unable to control a barrage of emotions and the urge to cry, I burst into tears. Months of planning, the physical hardship, life ponderings, past reflections, and future contemplations surfaced, but I shed joyful tears, not sad. I'd made it, a double crowner, an Appalachian Trail thru-hiker, a successful completion of the most iconic hiking trail on Earth. Before dipping over the tableland, I turned for one last lingering look at Katahdin. It was stunning, a poignant landmark offering confirmation of my success. It stirred massive emotions, so powerful I couldn't ignore them. It made us cry, sing and dance. We basked in our glory and those around us. It held us in the moment. We'd achieved a monumental challenge, our capabilities greater than we'd imagined. Katahdin encouraged us to pursue further dreams and a life away from the ordinary. We knew although this trip was over, new ones were beginning. My dromomania silenced, satiated, dormant, but it stirred as I descended. Eager for sustenance, hungry for the next adventure, the nomad demanded feeding.